Okay, let's put our hands together for Catherine Loke.
Thanks very much, Kelley. I can just advance with this, I think. I'm near enough. Oh, actually there's a pointer here too, right? Okay, good. Thanks for coming, everyone. Kelley keeps talking about me as an activist. I guess I'm actively doing things, but I don't advocate sort of standing in the streets and protesting and burning bras or things like that. I'd rather do things that are more positive so that it convinces people or inspires people to do things through positive action rather than protesting and, rather than being negative about it, right? Today, actually, I'm going to give you a lot of bad news at the start. Then after that, I'll give you the good news. So I think it's better than the other way around. But before we move on, right, how many of you think that climate change is the most serious thing facing humanity? Only 2, 3, 4? And what do the rest of you think? It's not serious or something else is more serious? Okay, so it's serious, but unfortunately it's not the only thing that's serious. Actually, a lot of things are very serious. So you see this diagram on the left. This was the planetary boundaries concept that was published by a group of scientists in 2009. This is actually an updated version, updated just in July this year. So what the scientists did was actually climate change. We've known about climate change for, I think, about 60 years. Scientists were already talking about it. But because scientists, the data that they share with us is often very difficult to understand. For the man in the street, right? It's like, what's all this data? What's all these numbers? What's this 400 parts per million, whatever? What does all that mean to my daily life? It doesn't mean anything to us. So what the scientists were trying to do in 2009 is come up with something that is easy to understand. So it's like when you go to a doctor, they will take your vital signs, they will take your pulse, check your blood pressure, take your temperature, and those give an indication of your overall health. So in the same way, the scientists came out with these 9 boundaries, which they said these are the key things that we need to keep an eye on, and that will tell us whether the earth is healthy or not, whether or not the life-giving properties can continue. So the bad news is actually, as of July this year, we have exceeded 5 of the 9 planetary boundaries. So the one that we always hear about is climate change. So, and we keep hearing about carbon. So I'm actually going to tell you it's not only carbon, there are more things or worse things than carbon. And then this part is actually biodiversity loss. Then land systems change because a lot of our land is being cleared for agriculture. And then here is phosphorus and nitrate pollution. So there's a lot of phosphorus and nitrate actually polluting our oceans, our rivers, which are causing the animals and plants to die. So as of July 2022, 5 of these boundaries have been exceeded. When I first knew about these planetary boundaries a few years ago, at that time I think we had only exceeded 3, and then now it's 5. But none of you heard about it in the news, right? Nobody knew about it, right? But this is actually very serious. As a, well, it's not even a double whammy because 5 have been exceeded. Then, in addition to all of that, we are actually also facing an energy and resource decline. So everything is actually converging right now. A lot of challenges are actually converging right now. If you look at the data on Our World in Data, this is a great website because it tracks almost anything, and you can get very clear graphs that actually graphically explain what's happened. So if you look at the energy that we have been using since 1800, so in the past we were relying on biomass, so we burned timber, and then when we discovered coal, we started burning coal. Ironically, actually in London, that was when the Industrial Revolution started. So in London, ironically, the discovery of coal actually saved the forests, because people were actually chopping down trees to fuel all the economic activity. So ironically, the trees were saved because now they got coal to burn. So now if you look at where we are now, like Singapore became independent here, right, 1965, and look at the amount of energy that's become available and the earth has, the humans have consumed. So if you look at Singapore, SG50, we all celebrated, our GDP grew from, something like people earning a few $100s a month to, thousands of dollars a year, $60,000, $70,000 a year or whatever it is, and we celebrated that. Why were we able to do that? Actually, we were able to do that because we had access to all of this. That's why. So GDP is very, very closely tied to energy. And if you look at the energy, like the fuel mix, if you like, so the world right now is still using quite a bit of coal and oil and also natural gas. So Singapore, about 20, 30 years ago, the government actually made a decision to convert our power generation plants to burn natural gas, because natural gas is the least polluting, the least carbon is emitted when you burn natural gas. So they did, it was a good step, right? It was actually a step in the right direction. But unfortunately today, that's not enough anymore, because we are now in this situation where we are using so much energy to fuel our economy. We've become very accustomed to so much energy being available, and our global supply chains have been pulled very, very far apart. So everybody is specializing in producing something and then importing from somewhere else and exporting, and our ships are going everywhere, and there's a lot of energy actually going into all that transportation and packaging, etc. So every time you go on the internet and you click, just a very simple click, you buy something, you are actually starting a chain of events from the other side of the world. Somebody is mining something to, to send to a factory to produce something, to then send to a manufacturer, and then send to the retailer, and then put it on a ship and then send to you. So we just click, click, click. It's so easy and we don't feel it. But the reality actually is, if you look at all of this, actually fossil fuel, we are still reliant on it for over 80%, 84% in 2019. 2022, still not much difference actually, we're still around there. And if you look at what about the remaining 16%, well, you got a little bit here, still biomass, and then up here, the so-called renewables, hydropower, wind, solar, and nuclear. All of these actually are reliant on fossil fuel, if you can believe it. So they are actually not alternatives, and they are also not renewable. Without fossil fuels, none of these can happen. So if, for example, you want to build a nuclear plant, you need fossil fuels to manufacture all the concrete and the steel and all the materials to actually construct the plant itself. Same with hydropower, same with wind turbines. Wind turbines, the blades are humongous and they're made of plastic. And the wind turbines have got huge concrete footings to prevent them from flying away if the wind gets too strong. And same with solar panels as well. In order to get all the minerals and whatever from the ground, we dig huge holes in the ground, and all the machinery we use to dig those grounds, the ground, are all powered by diesel. So actually oil, right now, oil, even though, okay, Kelley mentioned we'll have coal for 100 years, but doesn't mean we cannot power our vehicles with coal. Oil is the master resource. A lot of our heavy vehicles can only run on diesel because of the density of the fuel. So why don't we have electric trucks? Well, the reason is because trucks need to carry heavy loads. So that means they need a lot of energy, which means you need huge batteries, which means that by the time you put the batteries on the truck, they don't have any more capacity to carry any more load, right? That's why you can talk about electric vehicles, you can talk about cars and other small vehicles powered with electricity, but we don't yet see any trucks powered with electricity because we cannot put batteries on them. Okay, this is something called peak oil. If you Google it, you'll find that this is a quite controversial subject, because there was this guy called Hubbard in the early 1970s. He predicted peak oil in the US. And then in 1973, there was an OPEC oil crisis, right? So everybody thought, oh, Hubbard was right. You know, peak oil is going to come, then after that it's going to decline. But then the US discovered shale oil, So you can see here, this was like around the time when Hubbard predicted that peak oil was coming soon. Then it actually dipped, so everybody thought, oh, he was right. Then they discovered shale oil, then production went up again. So everybody went, oh, we're saved, you know, Hubbard was totally wrong. There's no such thing as peak oil, we still have plenty of oil. But actually, what the US is mining now is shale oil, and they've actually gone past peak production already. So even their shale oil wells are actually dropping in production. So you can actually read quite a bit on the internet, but generally what the experts who have been studying this agree is that peak oil occurred in 2018. So we are 2022 now, we are past peak. So what does that mean? Does that mean we have no oil? No, it doesn't mean we have no oil, but it means that from now on this is going to come down. And if you remember the graph I showed before, where our energy, we had so much energy that was climbing, right? Our GDP also went that way. And you know how closely our GDP is tied to oil and energy. So what happens if oil goes like this? What happens to our GDP? Actually, the reality is this is a biophysical limit. We can't get away from it. So what's going to happen to our GDP is our GDP is going to drop. It's going to decline. So if you are looking at it from a traditional economic point of view, that's disaster. You know, to the government, it's like if we have a recession, you know, a government is dead scared of recession. Why? Because we're going to lose our jobs, because our businesses are going to fail. Cosentino is not going to be able to sell as many tiles as they do right now, right? So everybody is afraid of that. But we really need to rethink, you know, how we organize ourselves, and then what is actually fundamental to the human economy. Is it money? Is it GDP? Is that what is fundamental to our well-being? At a fundamental level, I think we know that it's not, because people are actually right now complaining about being overworked, working very, very long hours. Everyone is so busy, but busy doing what? I'm not really sure. I mean, I'm very busy myself as well. Some of the things that I do, I think, I don't really want to do this, but you know, I need to earn the money to pay my bills. And if you have a loan, that's even worse, because you have to pay interest on your loan. So that's what's driving everybody to do something that you don't even believe in, and then you're actually continuing in this system where you are consuming more and more energy and needing to consume more and more energy. So if we keep on pushing like this, the whole system is going to collapse. But it's not too late for us to change, and to change, it actually requires us to really go back to fundamentals, to think what actually makes us who we are and what we actually need. So just a little bit more information. If you have time to read, or if you don't have much time to read, just read one book, read this book. If you don't have any other time to read this book. Alice Friedman has been studying energy for the past five or six decades. And as a young woman in the 1970s with the OPEC oil crisis, she came into this field thinking that she was going to solve the world's problems. You know, she was going to find the solution to energy. But after 5 decades of studying it, this book is actually a collection of her lectures. It's written in a very easy to read way, very humorous way. And she gives you a lot of data, but she also cites all her sources. So if you want to know more, then there are a lot of sources in there which you can continue to research. So I'm only giving you a tiny extract because there are many chapters in there. And since today I'm going to be talking about urban farming, so I've only picked out the information that's relevant to food production and urban farming. So initially, at the beginning of this talk, I said, who thinks climate change is the worst thing that we're facing right now? Well, to Alice Friedman, she thinks that energy crisis or energy decline is the most serious thing facing civilization. And actually, I agree with her, because when you reflect on how much we are dependent on energy, who amongst us here didn't use electricity for even 1 minute today? Did anyone, for just 1 minute today, not use electricity? No, right? Even when I'm asleep, I got my fan on. Even when I don't want to turn on my aircon, I still need my fan. So 24 hours, we need electricity. So what happens when energy declines? All of us are going to be affected. You look at the pictures of Pakistan flooding and you think, oh, that's Pakistan, you know, so far away, it won't affect us. But somebody turns off our electricity, what happens? All of us are affected. And within 2 days, everything in your fridge will have spoiled. And our supermarket food, frozen food, all will be gone, right? So it is something very, very serious, and something which we have to understand and address, and put our minds to how we are going to deal with this situation. So the next few points are actually relevant to our food. Did you know that for every, some of you are eating right now, right? So the food that you're eating right now, do you know that the calories that you're getting from that food, it took 10 times the amount of calories to produce that food and bring it to your mouth? 10 times. Because the food is grown somewhere else, halfway around the world. And then all the tractors and the whatever, harvesting equipment and whatever, all run on diesel. And after you harvest it, you got to transport it to a processing plant. They process, they will turn it into flour, maybe to make bread, whatever it is. Then they have to package it, send it to the baker break, whatever. It goes on and on and on along the chain of food production. Then after that, maybe it ends up in a supermarket, stays there for a while. Or some of it ends up on a ship, comes to Singapore. Some need to be refrigerated, and then it sits in the supermarket until you go and buy it. Then when you bring it home, maybe you don't eat it straight away, you put it in the fridge as well. Then when you want to cook, you also need to use your induction cooker, your microwave, whatever it is to cook. So by the time you eat it, actually we have already put in 10 times, in fact some go as high as 15 times the amount of energy. So in nature, any animal that expends more energy than it gets from its food will die of starvation. But we have been able to do it because we've been borrowing, we've been taking fossil fuels, and we've been using the energy that's embodied in those fuels in order to enable us to work and live the way that we work and the way that we live. And clearly that is not sustainable because we're in deficit. Right now, everything that we do today in the modern world, we're in deficit with the earth. We're drawing on something that we can never pay back. Another thing is that, remember I talked about nitrogen and phosphate, nitrate and phosphorus pollution. Where is it coming from? It's actually coming from agriculture. So in industrial agriculture, we are using artificial fertilizers and pesticides. And the fertilizers are actually leaching off the farm and going into our water, and that's where a lot of the pollution comes from, right? So everything that we eat came from like an industrial farm that uses all these chemicals. And the other thing is that when you have fertilizers made they're actually made from fossil fuels. So our fertilizers actually made from natural gas. So natural gas doesn't have nitrogen in it. Plants need nitrogen, so what the process is to use the natural gas, react with the air, and then that makes it combines with the nitrogen in the air to make the chemical fertilizer. But when you use this fertilizer in the ground, it makes the ground produce nitrous oxide. And nitrous oxide has 300 times the global warming potential of carbon dioxide. But did you know this? Is it in the news? We don't hear it in the news. We only hear about carbon dioxide. We hear about being net zero. We hear about carbon everywhere, but nobody's talking about nitrous oxide, which is 300 times the global warming potential. So climate change is not only caused by carbon dioxide. There's nitrous oxide, and there's one more, which is methane, right? And methane, I will explain later when I talk about farming, how methane actually gets into the air as well. So fertilizers actually harm the soil ecosystem. The soil organisms actually die when you put in these kinds of fertilizers. It upsets the balance. So after a while, it's like taking steroids, right? Initially, if you take steroids, you become very strong very quickly. But after a while, it poisons your body, and then you become weak. So the same thing is actually happening to our soil. We have been pumping it with all these fertilizers, but it's becoming, now the crop yields are actually dropping because of that. Okay, so, and then we talk about renewable energy, can we put solar panels and all that? I'll give you a little bit more data on that as well. And don't worry, the bad news is going to end soon, and then I will turn to the good news after this. Okay, so if fossil fuels are so damaging, why don't we just replace them with renewables? So this is Simon Michaud. He works for the Geological Survey of Finland, and he's been doing a lot of studies, actually for the government of Finland, but then it affects the entire world as well. So he's been working with the mining industry for the past 3 decades. So it's of great interest to them how much minerals are actually available to enable us to make all our solar panels and stuff, right? So if we want to fully replace fossil fuels, like we hear about electric vehicles, EV batteries, hydrogen fuel cells. By the way, hydrogen is not a fuel source, it's a fuel storage. So it's actually a battery because we need to make the hydrogen. Then we hear about wind turbines, solar panels and all that. How much minerals do we actually need to make all this stuff? Well, he did a quick calculation, or maybe not very quick, but he's published it in this publication here. So let's say if we look at lithium alone, based on the yield from mines in 2019, right, global production in the year 2019, then he estimated in this column, he estimated how much material we need. Then in this column, he took the figure of how much the mines are actually producing. So then you divide, this divide by this, then you get this, right? So for lithium, which we need to make our batteries, it's going to take us 16,000 years to mine the amount of material to make all the batteries that we need for all this stuff that we think we're going to fully replace fossil fuel. So clearly it's an impossibility, right? So actually you hear a lot about solar panels, electric vehicles, blah, 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 in the year, whatever, all Singapore cars going to be electric vehicle. Actually the biophysical fact is that we actually don't have the minerals to make this stuff. Okay, so now I think I will turn to the good news. Okay, so it sounds like doom and gloom. It's like we're all going to die and the world's going to end. No, it's not going to end actually. We're not all going to die. We can actually think and do things now, starting now, to change the course of how we live. So back to basics actually. If you look at how we are looking at sustainability right now, right, we got everybody is talking about ESG, doing calculations, green mark score, let's get to net zero, blah, blah, blah. Actually, just throw all of that away. Go back to basics. What do we need? We just need clean air, clean water, and food. Good food, healthy food, right? And if we can meet these 3, there's a 4th one, which is actually social interaction, which I'll talk about as well. But if you have these 3, if everyone has access to these 3, then we will actually find other ways to entertain ourselves. We don't need to worry about the rest. Everybody will find ways to, do what they want to do as long as they have these 3 things. So today I'll just focus on food. So just now I said, it takes 10 to 15 times the amount of energy to produce the food, right? So if you look at a chicken egg, for example, this is an industrial egg. Why is there so much energy going into it? Actually, because you need iron ore and you need coal to power your power stations, or natural gas in Singapore's case. Then you are actually growing things to feed the chicken as well. So you need to go through so much processing and transportation and building this farm to put your chickens in, and then you need to have electricity and air condition and blah blah blah, so that the chickens can live in a very, very unnatural environment, and then you have your egg. But you could also do it the permaculture way. So the way in permaculture, you actually need very little of all of these. So maybe you do need a little bit of iron to make some chicken wire or something. And you might need to, you have some materials to build a shelter for the chickens, but in terms of the feed, you can actually organize your farm in a way that whatever you grow, the chickens can actually eat from the ground itself, and you don't have to actually import feed. So actually, instead of concentrating all our farms into one big giant farm, it's actually more sustainable to have numerous farms within reach of most people. If you have numerous farms, then actually you take out a lot of the processing, transportation, packaging, refrigeration straight away, right? So we could actually, if we had able to grow a lot of our own food, we will drastically reduce the amount of energy we need to actually produce the food. And we need to actually redefine productivity, because right now the definition of productivity is energy blind. So right now, if we say a high-tech farm, right, you go per square meter of this piece of land, this high-tech farm can produce so many tons of food. And then, oh, this one using maybe organic farming or something, oh, the yield is very low. But if you change the calculation, change the perspective to consider fuel input versus output, it becomes quite different. Suddenly, this high-tech farm becomes negative because the amount of energy you need to put in is more than what you actually get out of it. Whereas if you were planting or growing just using the sun and rain, your energy input artificially anyway is zero. That means your productivity is actually infinitely more than using artificial energy sources. So, but what about Singapore? You know, everybody say we are land scarce, we can't grow, we must import. Is it viable for Singapore? First, I want to just introduce this permaculture to you. So actually, you can Google this as well. Permaculture was invented, I guess you can say the word invented, by Bill Mollison in the 1970s. So not even, he didn't wait until crisis, but in the 1970s already, he was already thinking that we are not living in harmony with nature. So how do we do it? It's actually not the same as organic farming. So organic farming is about not using pesticides, fertilizers, and it's actually quite labor intensive. Permaculture is something different. Permaculture is organic farming, but organic farming is not necessarily permaculture. So permaculture is actually a technique where you study the natural ecosystem and then you try and mimic it so that it becomes less labor intensive. So the farm will actually, nature, you use natural cycles and you use nature to actually run the farm. So a bit difficult to understand when you haven't experienced it. So actually there are opportunities to experience it if you want. So this is a farm, or I would say a garden. This is at 10 Winstead Road. I go there generally every weekend. I'm there at least one day a week. I'll be there. And this was what it was in 2019, before the farm is 3 years old, so they started in 2019. So before 2019, it was like this. So this looks like any other landscape area in Singapore, right? There's plenty of spaces between buildings that are like this, where you've got some lawn there, and then you've got some bamboo plants and stuff, and then it looks very manicured, looks very tidy, and looks very pretty, but it doesn't produce anything. Actually, we have a lot of this everywhere. I would say that when you go home tonight, right, on your way home, try and spot how many of these types of land you can see everywhere. I bet you can spot a lot. So this is what it looks like now. It's actually a garden. Okay, it's not MAD. MAD stands for make a difference. So they call themselves the MAD people, but for make a difference, not MAD. So actually, in this particular garden, they use permaculture techniques. This is Nazir. So he's the owner of Chanko Zen, which is the company that is doing this. And he trained in permaculture a few years ago. And then this is Vanessa. She's from Mindful Space, and she runs a company that organizes experiential learning for children as well as parents and children, parent-child. So the learning is through physical experiences rather than just through books. So actually over here, I don't know if you can see, over here we actually had cherry tomatoes. Then this is a moringa tree. Behind it also moringa. Over here is actually a grapevine. There are green grapes actually growing there. And then this particular papaya tree was planted by a bird. It wasn't planted by the people there. A bird ate papaya and pooped there, and then it grew on its own. How is it a permaculture farm or garden? If you look at this, there's a lot of gravel around here as well. So actually underneath, I can only sort of give you a little bit of snippet, but if you want to visit the farm, you can let me know. Underneath all of this, actually, there are layers of absorbent material. So we don't go there during the week. And there is no irrigation system. It uses sunshine and rain only. It's not labor intensive. It's run by volunteers mostly. And we're only there during the weekends, and even half a day, only Saturday mornings and Sunday mornings, that's all. A few of us will go there and potter around and do a bit of weeding and some harvesting and trimming and repairing anything that needs repair. And underneath here, actually, the absorbent, they call it lasagna planting. So there are layers of absorbent material, greens and browns, even cardboard. And it's layered such that when it rains, the ground absorbs the moisture. And then when it doesn't rain, the plants can still draw from this moisture. So there are actually techniques, there are a lot of techniques. The other thing is that you look at the terrain and the ground is actually sloping this way a bit. So the way that they design the various channels is to actually channel water to the growing beds, right? So permaculture is about being observant, looking at how nature works, and then let nature do the work so it doesn't become labor intensive for the human. Where we are, this is a little shelter, and around is actually a loofah vine, and this is the loofah here. It's about this big, and every week this loofah vine gives out about 4 or 5 loofah. So I brought loofah back. I made soup. I stir fried until my husband says, "Don't bring back any more loofah." He doesn't like loofah. So, but anyway, this is like an example of the harvest. So we got eggplant, this is spinach, this is basil, and then the papaya. And then we are actually in this loofah shelter. Every Sunday we'll have kombucha, because Razak here, he makes kombucha at home. And he brings the kombucha to share with us on Sundays. Apart from growing food, it's also actually very much a community thing. So just now I mentioned the social aspect. It's actually very important. Actually, I think COVID-19 taught us something, right? First of all, we need food, water, etc. But we also need social interaction, right? Because I'm sure during the lockdowns, you all miss your friends, right? And even Zoom is not the same. We still want to see each other. So the social aspect is actually very important. So coming back to this planetary boundaries, why is permaculture so important? Actually, if you look at all the areas of overshoot, permaculture can actually make a big difference. So if you look at climate change, carbon dioxide, can permaculture make a difference? Yes, it can, because healthy soil actually sequesters carbon. If we have more and more and more healthy soil with healthy microbiome, it actually sequesters carbon. Also, if we are using permaculture, we are not using fertilizers and pesticides, we no longer have this nitrous oxide problem. And the third one, methane, which I mentioned just now. When you compost your food scraps, right, and you use aerobic bacteria to break down your food scraps, it doesn't produce methane. But when you put your food scraps in the landfill, where there's no oxygen, they're buried too deep, then the anaerobic bacteria takes over. So anaerobic bacteria, when they break down the food scraps, produce methane. So that's the third thing that permaculture would actually solve. Then the other thing is that if we can have lots and lots of farms in a lot of urban areas, not just in Singapore, but cities around the world, then even if we can't produce 100%, I don't think it would be possible for us to produce 100% of food. But even if we produce a significant amount of our own food, it takes the pressure off the farmland in rural areas, which means that we can return some of the land back to nature and reinstate or preserve the biodiversity. So, you know, in these areas of biodiversity loss, if as a city we can reduce the pressure on rural land, then, you know, part of that can then be rehabilitated. Then, of course, the nitrogen and the phosphate pollution, there wouldn't be any, because you are just composting and using natural cycles to return nutrients back into the ground. Right? Same with novel entities. Novel entities is actually the chemical cocktail that we pump out every day in all our industrial processes. So in nature, actually, collaborative behaviour ensures survival more than competitive behaviour. We are so accustomed to hearing about survival of the fittest. It's true that competition is important and drives us to improve ourselves, but collaboration is actually equally important. So that's where, today we're also talking about economic system. This is something that I've written about. If you're on LinkedIn, you can look for the article there. I'll just quickly explain what it's about. So our conventional economy, actually, I call this a balanced economic system, right, that we can actually formulate. So I use this yin-yang analogy. So the yang dominant way of doing things is very aggressive, and our conventional economy is like this. It's motivated by self-interest, and we need to make money. In the city, if we don't make money, we cannot eat, right? There's no other way to get food other than to make money and then buy food. But if we had a social economy, that means the foundation of it is actually urban farms. If we had farms that are near everyone, where you can actually go and get food, then even if you lose your job, the pressure to feed yourself is eased by having access to food in another way, not through money, but through offering your labor, working, so it offers you a kind of buffer. Then this pressure to have GDP growth will lessen, because there are other ways for people to actually make a livelihood or be fed. Then you can actually link this to by creating a COE on limited resources. So in the same way that we have a COE on cars that limit the number of cars, we can look at, okay, where is it that we need to actually scale down our consumption, like air conditioning, for example, and we could have a COE system, which could then raise money to then help to fund this part of the economy as well. And then from what we get from COE, we can actually channel to rehabilitate other environments. So this is just a very quick snapshot. If you want, you can go and read the article on LinkedIn. And I have a balance here because you can actually decide yourself how much you want to participate in the conventional economy and how much in the social economy. So depending on your personal circumstance, let's say you're already close to retirement and you don't want to, you save up enough money, you don't want to keep on going to the rat race and all that, then maybe you participate very little here, but you participate more here, or whatever, in your own personal circumstance. Okay, so do we only have 1% of land for farming? So is it true that we only have 1% of land for farming? If you look at the URA master plan, so this color means agriculture, and actually the only part with this color is over here. So if you zoom into this area, it's a Lim Chu Kang area, we've got some here and here, right? And so that's all 1% of land for agriculture. But that's the old way of thinking. That's the industrial way of thinking. And the reason why agriculture is zoned all the way out there is because if you're using fertilizers and pesticides, it's actually an industrial process where you are actually polluting the environment. So you need to keep it away from residential areas. But if you're using permaculture, where you're using nature, then it's no longer pollutive. And you can have it right next door. It will not harm people. In fact, it will make people healthier, both physically healthier and psychologically healthier as well. So where is all this land then? Actually, if you look at Singapore Green Plan, quite interesting, right? Singapore plans to have households within 10-minute walk from a park by 2030. We want to develop 130 hectares of new parks, and we want to enhance 170 hectares of existing parks. So why parks? Why is it just a visual thing? Why do we want just a manicured city with just plants that are nice to look at? Why aren't they farms? They don't all have to be farms, but a significant portion of them can be farms. And as you can see from the Mad Garden as well, spaces in between buildings can be farms as well. So to me, we have a policy of city in nature, but to me, we should be looking at how we can transition to actually being a city in a farm. So just to end, I'm an architect, but I would say architect is actually very egotistical because we think we can plan everything, right? So, and then when we draw something, we don't want people to change. They are supposed to follow it. So we think that, okay, we can actually dictate how people live and work. Well, to a degree we can, but I would say that in the coming decades as energy declines, because we are entering into unknown territory, and I think that people are actually quite creative. So the role of the architect will change. I think that the role of the architect will be more like a facilitator, not so much like the master, and then I just tell you, you must do this here and you must do this there, but rather design things that actually cater to basic needs, and then beyond that give people blank slates so that there's opportunity for communities to come together to come up with their own solutions. So I believe, and I'm seeing it happen already actually, that it needs to be less top-down and there needs to be more and numerous neighborhood-based action. So part of the more and numerous neighborhood action is tell you a little bit about the Circle for Human Sustainability, which is the society that I founded together with a few like-minded people. So we are a bunch of people who are transdisciplinary. We don't just belong to one profession. We are putting together scientists, sociologists, economists, and built environment professionals. But even if you belong to another profession, you're welcome to join, as long as you have the desire to do something. So we are a think and do tank. We don't want to just talk and have webinars and seminars and then not do anything. We want to think about what we need to do and then do it. So if you feel strongly that you want to do something, then you're welcome to join us. And this is our vision, to bring about human society which is in harmony with nature, where humans can flourish enabled by a built environment that contributes to the well-being of people while staying within planetary boundaries. So this diagram here actually is from Kate Rayworth. She's an economist. So she took the 9 planetary boundaries that the scientists had come up with in 2009 and put it into an economic frame, economic concept. So what she thought of was that, okay, we have an outer ring that we cannot exceed. So all our economic activity must stay within that. But we also need to have an inner social foundation where if we went below this, then some people will starve or be deprived of essential things. So at the Circle for Human Sustainability, we look at it in a pretty similar way. But the thing is that Kate Rayworth only gave us a concept. She didn't give us any solutions. So it's up to us to actually come up with solutions, right? So to us, actually, urban farming is one of the most important things that we need to go into, because as I showed you just now, it actually helps us to stay within a lot of these overshoots. And then, in terms of the social foundation, it also provides a focal point for communities to come together, to work together. Okay, so that's it for today. And if you want to talk to me more, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. And if you want to visit the farms, you can also contact me. Thank you.
Thank you.